This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is October 30th, 2025.
I'm Scott Lindeboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. Happy Halloween if you're listening to this as it comes out. I'm going to be handing out candy in the pouring rain. The rainfall warning we have for Vancouver here this weekend, or at least tomorrow, on an otherwise, Friday night is like perfect for Halloween. It could be so great. Last year was such a nice night to be trick-or-treating, and then this year's looking miserable, but I got a tent, so hopefully we still get some good kids coming out.
And hopefully plenty of reindeer for the kids that go over the costume, however that's going to work.
Tarps, those tarp, I forget the word for it, things you throw over people, the clear ones. Maybe
ponchos?
We have ponchos, that's the word. Clear ponchos. If we can find some of those, I'll throw them over the kids. Or else umbrellas. Lots to talk about today. The strikes are over in BC and Alberta through very different means. We're speculating about provincial and federal elections that no one seems to want, but we could just fall into.
I mean, I could think of one or two people who wouldn't be sad if we ended up in one.
And restarting the trade war by, I don't know, saying exactly what Ronald Reagan said. Let's get into it after you go to patreon.com/politicos and give us some money. Here in BC, the GEU strike is over. The public and the PEA, the Professional Employee Association strike, is also over. The GEU reached a tentative agreement through the non-binding mediation facilitated by the legendary Vince Reddy, who solves every labor issue in this province, it seems. The union was happy with the mediation. They worked day and night. Alec Lazenby has a good piece in the Vancouver Sun if you're interested in the story of, working really late and coming to a deal. That gives it to you. And the PEA has been largely offered the same, but has some nuances relating to their members to still work out, like, do lawyers get paid based on the number of years since they've been called to the bar? And how do you pay the other professionals who get called to an emergency? Unique questions that aren't addressed by the GEU deal, but it sounds like they're being largely offered the same, which is a 3% increase per year for 4 years, as well as some target adjustments for the lowest paid workers. And then some additional things like faster grievance processes and improved fairness around telework and a modernized contract to reflect today's workplace realities, whatever the fuck that means.
Yeah, that is so vague. It could possibly mean anything.
There's clearly specific language that has been met, I hope, or else they just agreed to vague kind of pro-remote work stuff, which has become a continual battle between workers and employers, especially government ones who are trying to get people back downtowns so that the pizza joints don't close. It's a weird time in the economy.
Yeah, sure is. But speaking of the economy, this is going to come with a fairly hefty price tag on it. So the deal over 4 years is expected to add up to $6.4 billion, with the total additional payout factored in everything else beyond just a 3% bump would be $15.6 billion over 4 years, which I'm sure the finance department's already starting to sweat a little bit about.
It's going to get even better when they eventually get to a deal with the teachers, however long that takes, and whatever action that takes. And I believe there's a couple other public sector unions, but the teachers are probably the biggest still to come. But yeah, I don't think it's an unreasonable deal. Inflation is sitting at 2 to 3%. We've had quite a few years of quite low wage increases for many of these employees. So I think they're celebrating this as a victory for them. I don't think the government wanted to end here, but they're probably happy they didn't have to end any higher.
Yeah, because I believe the ask was 4%, if I recall. So didn't quite, I think, meet in the middle, but fairly close to it. Because government was offering what, like 1.5, 2, something like that.
Yeah, it depended on whose story you read at different times, because these things aren't always negotiated in the open for many reasons. And I think the good story for the government is David Eby's going into his leadership convention next month, where the members of the NDP will be deciding whether they like the job he's doing post-election or not. And as we've seen elsewhere, if you start to get at or below 70%, it's uncomfortable. There's no clear cutoff line other than 50%, but if you're in the 50 to 65% range, you're sweating really bad and probably looking for the exit door.
Yeah, especially in government too.
After you just won an election, technically.
Yeah, like have a majority government, right? It's a very slim one, but it's still a majority government. It's not like they've really put their foot in it in any big ways either. I mean, there seems like a lot of like the NDP types are kind of have like some, I don't know, general dissatisfaction, but like I think there isn't one, giant obvious, oh, this was a giant screw up or, bid scandal or anything that would really cement that, which means you ought to be able to comfortably clear that because, being in power tends to have a rally around the flag effect for the most part.
Yeah, I liken it it's not perfect analogy to the convention Mulcair went into after the 2015 election. Now, he didn't win that election, and so there was definitely very specific reasons to be disgruntled about that. But after, he still posted one of the federal NDP's best results, and it just
better than anything they've had since by a significant margin too.
And he just never made the case for why he should still be leader. And I feel like we're still in that realm provincially. And if you have Labor mad at you too, when you're the quote unquote workers' party or the party that was built in part by Labor, you're going to struggle. So I imagine having that off the back helps ease some of the tension and having it done in a way that the NDP likes to see, which is, the negotiations followed the standard process. There was no back to work legislation. The strikes were respected and all that, kind of the opposite of how we'll end the show talking about Alberta. But the process worked, Scott. It's other than the cost at the end, but it costs money to have employees. And
yeah, well, I'm not sure the hospitality industry would necessarily feel it was entirely great. We talked the other week about how it was starting to get pretty hard to source supplies when it came to liquor, and there's definitely some stress there. So I would hesitate to just call it an all-around win, even though like the NDP and their constituency and Labor would probably be happy with it.
Yeah, the obvious better system was the 7 years preceding this year of NDP government, where John Horgan impressively avoided labor strike for his entire tenure. I say unprecedented because you don't have to go far in BC history to just find our unions strike against anyone. They have no loyalty, or at least, their loyalty is to their members. And so, yeah, Horgan managed an impressive amount of time without labor, without a strike, and that period is over and we're back to the militant battles. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but I guess we're past. So, well, there's still the teachers and a couple other unions to go. So we'll see how the rest of the year goes. I'm sure a lot of people will be proud to be back at work, and you can go to BC Liquor now again and get your cheaper booze. The other weird thing this week from David Eby was his pitch to move forward this North Coast transmission line bill and the of related amendments included in that bill to play around with how BC Hydro sells its electricity to crypto and AI companies, which is none to the first and encouraging to the latter. The opposition has found all kinds of different reasons to dislike this bill. The Conservatives are just being in opposition. They have, different reasons within the party to fight the bill. One BC similarly, and the Greens are frustrated that the bill is being used, or that the North Coast transmission line will be used in part to support LNG expansion and powering LNG facilities.
It's also going to support a whole bunch of other things too. Like, it seems real silly on the Greens' part to basically try and stop an entire region's electricity infrastructure from being expanded because they don't like one customer that the electricity will be sold to.
I mean, the government is justifying a big part of the need for this much more infrastructure on the increasing demand of that customer that it is also propping up.
I mean,
so it's not
critical
just
minerals is a pretty big part of it too.
It's true. Nevertheless, the Greens did vote for it at second reading, but only after David Eby came out with a press conference no one was really expecting, where he said he was prepared to call an early election if this bill failed, and would go there regrettably if necessary, which is weird.
It's gone as far as, I think, maybe since then, but it's basically saying he's going to treat this as a confidence motion.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because for the bill to fail, he'd have to let it. You mentioned they have a technical majority. They used Bill 15, we mentioned earlier, as a confidence motion and got it through with, the speaker breaking the tie vote a couple times.
Yeah, because I don't think we really had to talk about this very much since the Daryl Pleckus era of speakership. And that first term, where it really was balanced on a knife's edge there. But, the convention, which is basically our rule at this point, is that the speaker votes to maintain the status quo. We'll let bills advance through, so we'll vote for them there. But when it comes down to the final bill, or final vote on it, would vote to maintain the status quo, which usually means if it's tied, the bill would get defeated. But the even bigger status quo is who is in government right now. So confidence motions, the speaker always goes with the government on if they have to be the tie vote on that.
And the government can conveniently declare any bill it wants a confidence motion. And so the North Coast Transmission Line bill is a confidence motion, and they got the Greens to vote for it as well. Interesting, even more interesting actually at second reading, because the Greens' argument for voting for it, despite some of their stated opposition, is, we can hash this out in committee, maybe we'll see the debate continue on this. They're not ready to kill the bill yet. But what I thought was interesting is the two of the three independents, Jordan Keeley did vote against the bill, but two independents weren't there that day. Eleanor Sturco and Amelia Fultby, who both left the Conservatives by choice or not, didn't show up for the votes. And I think that's intentional, because there's no abstaining if you are in the legislature. If you are in there, you have to vote. And so if you just miss that morning, or you're not around when the bell is rung, you can abstain in effect by just missing the vote. And I'd be very curious why. Maybe they had other things on, conveniently, both of them.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really see a reason why they'd feel strongly opposed to it, but also where they wouldn't want to be on record voting for it, but also would be fine with it passing, which makes the whole thing odd.
Well, that's what I think it comes down to, right? Is they have no interest in being dragged into this specific debate where they potentially are fine with the bill but don't want to vote for it.
Suppose so, but their job is also to vote on things in the House.
I got bad news for you about federal MPs' average attendance rate when it's a majority government.
Oh yeah, it's not always the case where they live up to that, but it really should be the aspiration to be there for all of the debates, absent some very good reason not to be.
Well, maybe I've just missed it. I haven't gone heavily looking for it, but yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting because, we do have Bill 15, which got passed in the spring. It was a real fight over that to do. But, it also, in theory, gives the government the power to push this through an expedited process. And yeah, there's some other stuff around it, but, there's no reason you can't cleave off the changes to how BC Hydro is going to prioritize their connections into another bill. Really, if the government really wants this done, they don't necessarily have to use the legislative tools for this, because they can just rely on the ones they already gave themselves. And I don't know, it's interesting that, 9 months ago, there's a real sense of urgency and need to move quickly on this stuff, and it has now been months since the Bill 15 and 14 passed in BC. Was it Bill 5 federally? Whatever Ontario's equivalent. Actually, that might have been Bill 5. Whatever the Ontario and federal bill numbers were for that too. They've all passed, and yet I don't think a single one of them has actually been used to help shepherd anything through at this point.
We did get a major projects office federally, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. They named some projects that they're excited about.
But even the major projects office is just standing up a bit of bureaucracy. It's not actually having moved any of the projects forward. And, there's been a lot of talk about the need to, diversify the Canadian economy, make it more resilient, less dependent on U.S. trade, particularly because it is just such a large part of the economy. It's almost existential when it comes to the prosperity of Canada, to be able to figure out how to navigate that, particularly if trade talks break down and CUSMA doesn't get renegotiated and extended. You need to do a lot quickly on that. I think for all of the talk, people kind of underestimate just how big a lift that is. And if you're going to do that on the matter of years rather than, decades, you need to do a lot quickly. It's like turning a super tanker, and right now everything we've seen provincially, federally is, they've notched the rudder over a degree or two. They're not turning hard, to port or starboard to try and get that thing turning. And I don't know, just kind of wondering what happened to all of that energy and interest. There's still I think a general elbows up vibe, but the actual on the ground things that need to happen to make that more than just a vibe have kind of disappeared, it feels like.
The elbows up vibe is there in the people. You go on any forum or Facebook or Reddit or even, social media, and people have that energy for Canada to do stuff, especially sovereignty related. But the political process in this country is broken, to use the common parlance, or it's ineffective. It's lost its capacity to, over the years, to effectively do big things through some of that's regulatory, some of that's ambition. It's just this complex outsourcing of expertise through all these different angles that we've forgotten. We don't have the muscle memory on how to build things quickly. We did we can still build things, right? Site C got built. We got some SkyTrain lines. Things take time. They go over budget. So doing big things quickly, I guess, is the thing we've lost.
Because that's the thing is, Site C started getting planned in like the 70s, 80s, got approved more than a decade ago. And it's a giant hydroelectric dam. It's not going to be quick to build, but even the process getting Site C approved was pretty slow. But, you can compare that to, the start of World War II. We did not have a lot of capacity and knowledge in the government at that time on how to do that kind of thing. And the government of the day moved quickly and figured that out, brought in the expertise from outside and, actually got stuff moving. We'd be, World War II lasted from 39 to 45. That's 6 years. We'd be
speaking German by this point.
Yeah, we're like a 12th of the way through the whole length of World War II just in this period here. Almost coming up to the 10% mark. We had more done at this point back then on it, and that just sense of urgency just isn't there. And granted, shooting wars tend to sharpen the mind a little more than trade wars do, but sharpen the mind to bring more focus in, but it shouldn't be that big a gap.
Bring it back to this bill. I do think this bill was necessary in part, even without whether or not Bill 15 exists, because it does do some specific things in addition to the crypto I mentioned earlier. Like, it creates a permission for First Nation ownership of part of that line with BC Hydro. And that's actually the biggest chunk of the bill. The second is all like the mining crypto and AI processes and who BC Hydro can do. And then that's it on the bill. So it's like, we're going to work with Indigenous people to own and build this, which I don't think was set out in Bill 15. And then the rest. So the bill's moving forward. I don't see it failing, as we mentioned. I'll be curious if the Greens really try to fight this bill. I think there's better targets again.
I just find the Green thing interesting because it kind of just goes to show there's underneath a lot of the surface level stuff in the Greens. There's really is kind of just like a degrowth core to the party that's real hard to shake, and it comes out every now and then on stuff like this.
The Conservatives are in a tough spot. Another poll has come out from Leger showing, similar to Angus Reid had a week or two ago, people don't like him, both generally and within his own party. They write, despite receiving a 70% confidence vote from party members earlier this month, nearly 2/3, 63% of British Columbians think he should step down as leader of the BC Conservatives. Only 37% think he should stay. Among Conservative voters, 54% say he should remain, but 46% say it's time for a change. David Eby has higher public confidence than Rustad, and this poll had Eby's NDP at 48% to Rustad's Conservatives at 38% at the election voting intention, which was kind of the nice thing to go hand in hand with Eby speculating about calling a snap election is, he's as ahead in the polls as John Horgan was in 2020. Sure would be nice to have a majority and not have to think about things like the speaker casting tie ballots. A bigger
majority.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of, I think, particularly interesting thing in here for me. Because, it's not a surprise the leader that's having a bunch of internal fights with the party and, was never a particularly, inspiring or charismatic leader that really rallied support around him personally, as opposed to the Conservatives generally. It's not surprising he's having problems at all on that. This is in some ways a water is wet poll. But the really interesting thing for the broader thing is that what was, for quite a while post-election, a pretty stable situation where the two parties were more or less neck and neck, generally around margin of error or just like slightly outside of it, where it was the Conservatives were generally holding their own, and even if they had some of their own internal problems, they were at the very least keeping the government up at night on some of this stuff and made sure they couldn't take anything for granted. And that has now changed, which just puts the whole provincial scenarios in a different spot and introduces a new dynamic, which is probably why you've seen EB floating that early election idea. Although the other thing I've seen suggested out there is that this is a way for him to head off a leadership review that wouldn't go all that favorably, which I'm not sure how much thought to put in, but
can't have a leadership review if you're in the middle of an election.
Yeah, exactly. And coming out with
it would work well for both EB and Rustad to have an election right now, at least personally.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, Rustad also can't be forced out if they are.
Tell that to Kevin Falcon.
Did Kevin Falcon get forced out, or did he just throw in the towel and take the entire party with him?
True.
Yeah.
He forced his own team out. He forced himself out.
Yeah.
Although he is still leader.
That was its own particular thing, but yeah, on the early election call, it really is the case where they both might benefit. I mean, EB, more likely than not, is going to gain seats, and it would put any leadership questions out of mind for a while, and at least let him push that up. And, Rustad is a dead man walking politically, so the only thing that would potentially change that is if he somehow managed to win an election, which I would not put very much money on. In fact, would pretty heavily bet against. But, when it's a 90-10 chance, that 10% does come off every now and then. And he is probably better off rolling the dice on that than taking a sure loss.
I'll say this on the polls. Abacus Data has a poll at about the same time as Leger's. They have the NDP 47 to the Conservatives 40. That Angus Reid poll I mentioned has the Conservatives at 41 to the NDP at 40. That's the Angus Reid and Main Street are the only ones to recently put the Conservatives ahead. Main Street's was from June. There's a Cardinal Research one from October as well that had it 43 to 41, and Research Co had it 44 to 38. So most of the pollsters are showing the NDP with the lead. But I did want to mention Angus Reid has it kind of tighter. But Angus Reid also has one BC at 5%, which no one else has measured. So I don't know what's going on there. They also have the Greens at 11. Just everyone except is doing different there. But things would tighten in an election. Leger did ask, which of these describe John Rustad? Has extreme political views, was agreed with by 49% of British Columbians, versus has strong leadership qualities, was only chosen by 29%, which makes me ask, have you watched the news?
The 29%'s surprising. You looked at the partisan breakdown. Overwhelmingly strong, much stronger with the Conservatives than the other two parties on that. So some of it might just be, people who haven't paid quite as much attention to it that are, putting one in for the team on this one. Although I am really curious about the 7% that put very strong for the leadership qualities. Like, who are those people, and just what is their perception of reality? Is the sky purple in their world?
So Rustad's embattled. David Eby's health ministry is still embattled, as another bad story from Interior Health, this time in Vernon from the Jubilee Hospital, where 4 psychiatrists have reportedly quit recently. Interior Health says these are all unrelated.
But it's also the entire
resignations.
department, I believe.
I was trying to figure that out. It's hard to tell sometimes from this reporting. One employee at the hospital said their resignations were all due to people being overworked, and there's no planning at the hospital or in the region to like help people not get burnt out. So, three of those psychiatrists are going to continue in community care at least. So they won't be available for acute needs, but they will still be available for referrals, I guess. But it's another bad news story from Interior Health, which is starting to make. Was there not also a leadership shakeup in Interior Health?
Yeah, there was recently
as well.
Interior Health. I believe I am mixing this one up with the other one in terms of the whole department, but 4 is still probably pretty hefty amount of the total doctors in a unit like that, particularly in a smaller place like Vernon. But yeah, there's leadership shakeups at Interior Health. I mean, they've been plagued with a bunch of issues. It's they're in a tough spot, and there does need to be something big change there to fix how it's going.
Yeah. Go listen to our last conversation about hospitals.
Exactly. Yeah.
Struggling.
I could go on the exact same rant about how this really ought to be the sort of thing that brings governments down, but I don't know. It would be nice to actually have a good news story out of healthcare in BC rather than some other ER shuts down yet again, or a bunch of doctors resign because the working conditions are so terrible, or nurses WorkSafe BC claims due to like patient violence have spiked, which was a story from last year, I think. The whole thing is a mess, and one would hope the NDP would have been better at this considering their branding, but there's just a lot of work that needs to be done to right the ship on this.
Let's let you go on a rant on vacancy control instead, as the BC Greens have introduced a private member's bill to reintroduce vacancy control in British Columbia. Back in the Dave Barrett era, the NDP introduced it. These days, they said they had a task force look at it and did not recommend it, so they're not interested in it. The basic idea being the rent is tied to a unit rather than the tenant. So if someone moves out, the landlord or owner of the unit can't raise the rent back to market rates. They can only raise it a generally inflation-adjusted amount for the next person to move in. This discourages rent-evictions, dem-evictions. This discourages pushing people out and then go, oh, actually, we can re-rent it, which is a common enough issue for people in precarious housing, like renters.
Yeah, the problem is it also discourages the basic upkeep and maintenance of units. It also discourages the construction of additional housing, which I don't know if anyone's noticed, is a significant challenge right now in not just the province, but the whole country. This is one of those things that sounds good until you start looking at it for any length of time and understand the second order effects on this. Yeah, there's absolutely a reason why when the experts looked at this for the BC government, they said, nope, this doesn't work, because what usually happens in other cities or places that have tried this is that the costs of running and maintaining rental buildings continues to climb, and does not necessarily go hand in hand with CPI. It's a different bundle of goods than that. So even if you do inflation adjustments, which not always being the case when it's been done in a lot of places, and there's always political pressure to push that down below the inflation amount, which introduces other problems with maintaining the system. The costs, or the ability to charge rent, does not cover costs. That leads to chronic underinvestment. You lose rental apartments off the market, and it ends up creating a much worse housing situation overall. And yeah, sure, a few current tenants benefit from that. It's, not nothing, but at the cost of the whole rental market getting significantly worse, it's a price that's not worth the benefits.
I think we'll see more coming from the Greens as Emily Lohan put out a pretty big package as part of her leadership bid about policy, and vacancy control was a small part of what she talked about in housing. A lot of the other stuff was, massive build outs on public housing and
overall her
stuff like that. So I'm curious to see how they start to pitch it, not just as, because, the challenge with being in opposition in a small party in a legislature like that is you get to pitch like one idea at a time until there's an election, and then you can bring forward your full platform. Like, I could see it being a valuable tool with some caveats and ways to account for some of the dampening effects if you can offset with, better investments and account for the need to, maintain and improve units, so you can permit between tenant increases above inflation, but just not fully back to market. Like, don't jump at $300 or something. I'm curious to see, right? I'm not opposed to it. I think it could be positive, but it's interesting to see the Greens they've taken this stance before. So it's not really that new for them, but this is the first bill since Lohan became leader.
Yeah, it does lean into the more kind of populist side of her campaign, and it would not surprise me if the next Green private member's bill kind of falls in a similar vein to that.
That's a good question. The Leger poll does show that housing is back on the top of minds of issues for British Columbians, and playing into populist solutions to housing is always appealing to British Columbian politicians based on how the speculation tax came, the foreign buyers ban or tax that Christy Clark started with. There's all kinds of tools that you can reach for that we can debate endlessly, but definitely fall in the populist bucket. Jumping federally, we might have another election, as we still have this. I think it's the last week we have to discuss the budget without having the budget.
I
the
believe
Liberals are still saying
Tuesday is when that's coming out, November 4th. So
here's what you need to know about the budget. The Liberals say they don't have the votes. The Conservatives and NDPs are weighing what they could do. According to CBC, the Conservatives don't want an election, but they also don't want to support a budget that increases the deficit and the debt. The Bloc, we've talked about their pledges or their demands, and the Liberals have apparently granted at least one of those, which is a crackdown on trucking tax evasion schemes.
It's, better than shoveling billions of dollars into the wealthiest demographic in Canada. So, not the worst of the lot suggestions by any means. Hopefully it's enough.
And I don't think it's going to be enough to win the Bloc over, but it's, an interesting tilt to them. The most interesting part of this CBC article is the Conservative sources and at least one NDP source saying what might happen is a few NDP MPs just don't show up to vote, and then the Liberals have a de facto majority. The Conservative sources told CBC that the NDP caucus is very divided, which I believe, but is interesting coming from the Conservatives. And it also suggests that the Conservatives are kind of wheeling and dealing with the NDP to make this happen, that they can vote against the budget, but the NDP will conveniently let it pass, in agreement for the Conservatives to stop criticizing the NDP, or at least put the kids' gloves on for a little while.
Well, I think some of that, too, is the Conservatives might have realized they made a strategic error in hitting the NDP quite as hard as they did in the lead up to the last election, and this would have probably worked out if the whole thing hadn't got upended, and the Conservatives have ran the campaign they wanted to in 2024. But when it came to the actual election this time, it was just the case that they ended up collapsing the vote down to the Liberals on that, and it hurt a lot of the vote splits that otherwise would have gone in their direction. So some of it might just be a strategic recalibration on that front. I'm also a little surprised the Conservatives seem so hesitant, at least based on the information being passed on anonymously on this one to the to CBC on it, because I actually don't know if the Conservatives should fear an election. Carney's kind of stalled out a bit on the momentum he had. There hasn't really been any big deliverable that has come in. The honeymoon period's basically over with him, and the issue polling that's out there is showing that Trump is, and the relationship with America is falling back quite a bit when it comes to top issues for voters, and it's going back to a lot of the ones that were the case a year ago, where the Conservatives were very well positioned to run a cost of living, public safety, you just kind of want a changing government, all of those one issue election. And, now that that's getting back in the front window, it wouldn't be the worst thing for the Conservatives to go to the polls on an issue set that they can mount a strong campaign on. Plus, that would be yet another leader that would be spared a leadership review by going to the polls.
That's the big one there. But, I mean, Carney's kind of positioned himself as a soft conservative, especially on the crime stuff, that he could, risk sopping up some of their support in a campaign where he could front and center that. And I don't know how Don Davies would do. On the NDP, I think it's pretty clear the division is between the Don Davies camp and the Jenny Kwan camp. And it's kind of like 4 on one side, 3 on the other. And it's well documented. The final vote in there is Elizabeth May, who said she's not going to vote for new fossil fuel subsidies, but otherwise she's going to wait and see what's in the budget. Thanks for asking. She didn't add that last part, but it seems like it's worth it. I think the funniest outcome would be the Conservatives pitching a coalition with the NDP supported by the Bloc, because technically we're not so far out from an election that could be a reasonable thing to put to the Governor General, but it won't happen, obviously. But
yeah, not at all.
It would, mathematically it could.
Mathematically it could. I think the funnier scenario would be that both BC and the federal government miscalibrate, and they both end up failing on the confidence vote and going to the polls at the same time. We can have a
devastating for the federal NDP's candidates here in BC.
Oh yeah, no, it would completely screw them. The Liberals might be in the best position because they don't have a provincial counterpart party to siphon off resources from. And but yeah, it would just be funny to have to do a December election, 2 of them simultaneously, and just watching both the provincial and federal candidates just get so uncomfortable having to deal with questions that the others' campaigns are going to raise on it. The whole thing would be amazing to witness.
It would also solve the court case issue out of Quebec, where following the election, we had the issue where a Bloc Québécois candidate had lost to a Liberal by 1 vote, and they had gone to court to challenge the election after it came out that Elections Canada had missed someone's ballot, or there was some irregularity that was substantial enough that it was like, okay, this is awkward.
Yeah, what happened was an election worker, by mistake, put his own postal code rather than the Elections Canada office postal code on I think it was 50 mail-in ballots that went out. So some of them just got returned, unable to be delivered, and the Bloc found at least one person who testified that they voted for the Bloc, but their ballot got returned, and since it was a 1 vote margin, that it should be the election should be thrown out and go to a by-election on that.
The court was unconvinced, and so the election stands. I think the biggest frustration for us is that this took so long to decide.
Yeah.
The election was like 6 months ago.
That's the crazy thing, is it really should be an immediate thing where you basically sort it out in, the time where the vote is still being certified, or, shortly after that. But clearly that did not happen, which, if there was a serious error on this one, that should be rectified much sooner on there. But yeah, ultimately the block candidate didn't prevail because the court kind of figured this is, small enough, and to actually undo an election requires a massive error rather than just a moderate one of this kind.
It'll be, actually, you mentioned funniest results. Funniest results is if this gets appealed as we go to an election. I mean, it'll just nullify the appeal, but it's a mess. It's a mess. Also, as a mess is the new agencies Mark Carney has created that we know nothing about, technically, on the back end. Specifically, the Major Projects Office, the Defence Investment Agency, and Build Canada Homes. Their framework agreements and business plans are fully secret, which is quite unique for the federal government. It's not 100% unique, but largely agencies made within departments of the government are public and therefore should be publicly accountable. These ones aren't. The opposition has no access to these records. The public has no access to these records, and it's all pulling from a rule created in the late 90s that allows essentially secret special operating agencies within the government. Obviously, the opposition does not like this and thinks we should not have secret bureaucracies, or bureaucracies that operate in secret, at least.
Yeah, and keen students of Canadian political history may remember that the 90s featured a rather large scandal involving secret undertakings by a federal liberal government at the time, where the money and stuff and the processes were not exactly transparent until the whole thing broke. So I don't actually know if these were the same things that the Liberals hid the sponsorship scandal on, but man, it's not a great time to be looking back and think, yeah, that was an era where they did government secrecy great and had, agencies operating without sufficient oversight, doing a lot of money.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, but more generally, this is just one of those things where the default level of secrecy in Canada is just kind of crazy, and it's weird that it's gotten so acceptable. Basic stuff that is just...
Did it get acceptable, or was it just kind of always the process? And as the rest of the world got more transparent in their government, we didn't.
I don't know. I think there's definitely been the case where for a while, stuff that just gets released as a matter of course in pretty much every other democracy just doesn't count. It's not like we haven't also just passed a bunch of things in the same time that in theory were to make it, I'm pretty sure around the same time as most of the other democracies are doing it, we brought in Freedom of Information Act and other policies on that. And, overall, the level of secrecy, if anything, has headed in the opposite direction during all that time.
There's so much we could critique on that. I'm going to move ahead into our trade war update very quickly. As I mentioned, Doug Ford launched, or at least Ontario launched, this series of ads that you've probably heard about by now, featuring just a quote from Ronald Reagan and pictures of construction workers and stuff. It pissed off the Reagan Foundation. It pissed off Trump, but not immediately. And now they've pulled a bunch of those ads, which is great for Ontario because they don't have to pay for them, and more people know about them through the Streisand effect. And the bad news for Canada is it led Trump to say trade negotiations are off. I'm adding another 10% tariff to you.
Well, if it wasn't that, it would have been something else.
Yeah,
I mean, right
100%.
around the same time, the Carney government announced they were going to be putting a fairly strict import quota on, like, was it GM Stellantis products, over them pulling their factory out of Ontario to south of the border after the taxpayer kicked in, was it like $13 billion for that one? It would have been that, it would have been something else, or it would have been that, I don't know, Dominic LeBlanc didn't smile right whenever he was meeting with the last person he talked to down there. The whole thing is, you can't negotiate with someone that's that fickle and unable to stick with anything for any amount of time. I honestly don't think this was really the ad. That said, the Reagan Foundation was being a bit.
That's so funny.
Well, they were being a bunch of partisan hacks on that one that were more concerned about playing nice with the GOP than they were with honestly representing Ronald Reagan's views on it. Because,
arguably, Ronald Reagan was such a partisan that maybe this is the kind of move he would have supported. But I don't know. He's not alive today.
But
and he
it's
definitely
impossible to
did not like tariffs.
Yeah, it's impossible to look at the whole of Ronald Reagan and conclude that the guy liked tariffs in any way.
Fact. BC, for our part, is proceeding with our own, ads targeting Americans. Specifically, we're going after the softwood lumber dispute. And I haven't seen any ads produced yet, but David Eby has said we're producing some and we're going to keep moving ahead. And he supports the ads that Doug Ford's government ran. So the premiers are on one side and very clearly standing with the populist energy because Canadians liked it, I think.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a bunch of back and forth after Trump announced that he was cutting off the trade negotiations on it over whether or not Ford should get the blame on it. But, other than, I think a few people online and in the pundit class being angry about it, I don't think there was particularly strong blowback on it. Wab Kinew enthusiastically backed Ford on his play there.
I don't think Danielle Smith officially backed him, but she's been busy. She's in Saudi Arabia, actually. I know that because she was in an airport lounge on Monday night as her government was passing its back to work legislation. I'll mention that in a second. The other thing going on in Alberta is the petition. Albertans like Canada. The petition to have a referendum saying they want to stay in Canada has 450,000 signatures or more, which is well over the 294,000 they needed.
Yeah, so cleared the threshold by a large margin. I would be interested to know if there were any confused separatists on there that thought it was the other referendum they were supporting when they
they wanted this referendum so they could vote against it.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing on this. So the basic theory behind this, one I understand, is that basically under the Alberta referendum law, you can't have multiple referendums that concern the same topic, and I think it's like two, and there's a 2 to 3 year window when you can't bring one in either after the other one wraps up. So basically, the strategy on this was we're going to do our own referendum, front run that, get it as favorable as possible for the conditions on that, and basically try and outflank the separatists on this one. This one, that's a strategy that I can see the logic on, but I'm not sold on its inherent benefits. There might be a little petard hosting, or at least it opens up the possibility to that. I mean, the comparison that has been often drawn on this is the Brexit referendum that David Cameron initiated, not expecting it to pass or even being supportive of, but in order to calm the sentiments by basically doing a put up or shut up moment on it. And I have concerns that the same sort of scenario could play out, that even if the poll showing that overall separatist sentiment is shy of a majority by a decent margin, that you could still see a lot of people voting for it on I don't actually want to separate, but I kind of want to send Ottawa a message on it, and I don't know, it could get away from them.
Yeah, you can't have two questions makes a lot, or two of the same-ish questions makes a lot of sense, because what happens if you have this ballot initiative that says, do you agree Alberta should remain in Canada, pass, but then you also have, do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province in Canada, pass, and you have like contradictory results from the public, which you could get in a situation where
it'd be so
one of them
easy
is a
to get
torqued
that
question, right?
I mean, you ask the public if they want great public services, no deficits, and low taxes, and they will emphatically support all three, despite it being impossible to do all three at the same time.
Yeah. So, good for them on the effort. Like you, has never been a like, oh man, this is a great move, but it's interesting, and it's a good way, I think, to gauge discontent, which is undoubtedly rising now as Alberta took the almost unprecedented step of ordering its teachers back to work with a binding contract, which actually BC has done, but they added the notwithstanding clause because when BC did it, it got struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada as a fundamental violation of Section 2D, the right to peaceful assembly, and to negotiate with your employer under that. Alberta's justification for forcing a contract and not just pushing them to binding arbitration, as most governments would do, is unclear to me. They, made the justification that they needed to get teachers back to school, which I can understand, even if I don't love back to work legislation. But pulling the nuclear option here was risky. Turns out it was fine for them, because when all the unions descended to say what they would do, their plan was to talk about organizing to defeat Daniel Smith through legal means like petitions and recall initiatives. There is one planned against the education minister, and organize towards a general strike if necessary, but not necessarily.
That's really like most Canadian of approaches to
it. Oh
it.
my God, the press conference from Gil McGowan felt like satire. It felt like a sketch from 22 Minutes where you're like, oh, so you're going to do a general... The media was like, what do you say to people who are going to feel disappointed that you're not just doing a general strike today? And he's like, I don't see why anyone would be disappointed that we're talking about getting ready to think about doing one. Like, it's Alberta. My hopes weren't high. I realize you can't just say general strike and it magically happens. But when Doug Ford tried this a couple years ago, the unions were like within a day of all walking off because they don't want to be forced back to work like this. It undermines a lot of their collective bargaining rights.
That's the thing that's incredibly striking on this, is that how the hell are the unions not prepared for this? We literally...
They've been working all summer, too, on this thing called Common Front.
Yeah, well, not only that, Doug, like you just said, Doug Ford basically did the exact same play. They never got around to actually introducing the legislation, or might have gotten... No, I think they introduced it, but didn't pass it. It never got enacted. But, this scenario is literally the most predictable one you should have and consider, and how did you not have a plan for it? I mean, it would be a little hypocritical of me to say they should have immediately gone to like DEFCON 1 and done everything possible on it without having thought this through, because I was pretty critical of the postal union for basically jumping right into a strike after the federal government announced they were, just looking at making some changes on the structure of Canada Post's operations. But here, at least, they should have had more foresight and planned it out, because I think anyone could have seen that the Alberta government would have been quite likely to use back to work legislation.
And they talked about using the notwithstanding clause for the last week.
Yeah.
They said, we're probably going to drop it on Monday.
Well, also, ever since
ballooned.
In 2015, the Supreme Court, reversed a bunch of its previous jurisprudence on the right to strike and read one in, made one, depending on your perspective, either read one into the Constitution or just kind of made it up. But either way, like, ever since then, it was going to be likely that the notwithstanding clause would come out to play on that one, particularly in provinces run by governments that are inclined to see it as one of the many legislative and constitutional tools at their disposal. You got a plan for this one. It's surprising they don't have that in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, so either way. So there's, a range of perspectives on the notwithstanding clause, but if you're in the camp that thinks it's, unconscionable and a gross, violation of the Democrat spirit to use it, you should be prepared to go hard on it when it comes out. And if you're in the camp that sees it as an important part of the constitutional arrangement, a necessary check on an unelected judiciary being able to set policy and step outside of their purview when it comes to overruling the democratic will of the people, it is still, that puts it into the political realm where the response would be you put political pressure on the government to back down on that one. Either way, no matter what your view of the notwithstanding clause is, if you don't like what people are doing with it, you're going to have to push hard back against it if you want to see the outcome changed.
Well, maybe they will eventually. Lots of criticism is easy to find on this bill. The Canadian Bar Association comes out and points out that if we're going to use this clause, they argue use it as a tool of last resort. Like, this bill was pushed through in 6 hours, and it took 6 hours because the NDP used every little bit of filibustering they can. But in Canada, that's not a lot when a government has a majority and invokes closure effectively. And the debate over closure, I think, actually took longer. The Blue Jays game took longer that night, partially because it went to 18 innings, but mostly because it went to 18 innings. But legislation should not be passed faster than a baseball game, except in extreme circumstances. And it's hard to argue a strike that's been going on for 3 weeks needed to end that quickly. So I'm curious to see how the fallout will be in Alberta. Every Albertan I know, which is a very biased sample, I'll admit, was not happy with how this rolled out. Obviously, I've been reading some of the stories from what do parents think? And a lot of them are like, yeah, honestly, it's good to have my kid back at school. Don't feel great about everything that's been happened. Yeah, I wonder if it's going to blow back at Danielle Smith, because I don't know. We'll have to see. I think they've missed an opportunity to capitalize on a lot of energy to fight the government, but she's still going to be government tomorrow and when she gets back from Saudi Arabia, which again is hilarious. Just like the visuals. Oh my God, going to a dictatorship when you're invoking the notwithstanding clause. What are you doing? The jokes write themselves.
What even is she doing in Saudi Arabia anyway? Like, it's not like the Saudis need oil.
Honest question, or
yeah, honest question on that.
Okay,
a little bit of a joke, but like honest question too.
Energy and technology investment discussions. She's going to join the province's jobs minister in the UAE next for the Abu Dhabi International Petroleum Exhibition and Conference, where she's going to announce Alberta's new trade office in Abu Dhabi.
Okay, so what we're probably trying to round up investors than trying to sell the oil in that place.
Yeah, if you're not going to take the American oil investment money, you could take the Saudi and UAEs, I guess.
I mean, honestly, it's better than trying to create a slush fund that is disguised as a pension program to do that, so...
And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.